At Northeastern University School of Law. My colleague Jules Seabrook and I, wave Jules, creative director of the lab. For the last several years, we've been teaching a laboratory seminar in applied design and legal empowerment here at the School of Law. It's an opportunity to teach law students how to use techniques and methods of human-centered design in response to a legal-sounding problem. For this last quarter, we've been really honored to be joined by Professor Sarah Knaus and 6 students from the College of Arts, Media, and Design. We are tackling a question that will help inform the work of law students this coming spring who will be going down to the southern border to help prepare refugees for their credible fear interviews. The work that you're going to see tonight are all prototypes. Please keep that in mind as you think of questions and critique. We are looking for your feedback so as to make these prototypes as strong as possible. The prototypes are going to be completed into final form and used in May of 2019 when a team of approximately 8 law students will be going down to the southern border to Dilley, Texas to work in the detention center in Dilley, preparing refugees for credible fear interviews. Sarah and Jules, did I forget anything? I do want to mention that we are joined on this beautiful iPad here via Skype by Kate Akaya, who is a recent graduate of Northeastern University School of Law, who's currently working as a hearing officer for the Immigration and Customs Enforcement and does credible fear interviews, or will be doing those very soon. So we're thrilled and very honored that Kate was able to join us. Thank you, Kate. And with that, I'll turn it over to our students. Thank you.
Thank you, Dan. So back in June of this year, a story that dominated the news cycle for a few weeks was that families were being separated at the U.S.-Mexico border. And the public responded with outcry over how could this country treat families like this, even if they were from another country. Situation has improved for families being separated at the border since, but what has remained is the larger issue of how people seeking asylum in the United States are treated in the conditions that they face, how inhumane this is. The experience for people seeking asylum begins back in their home country where they are faced with trauma or a reason why they have to leave their country in the first place. They then have to travel that distance from wherever their country is, typically somewhere in Central America, all the way to the U.S.-Mexico border, facing several hardships that are disorienting. And it's not any easier once they get to the United States and actually try to seek asylum. They are housed in these detention centers. They interact with officers and guards who further antagonize them. And this is an experience that isn't just due to the negligence of the government, but is rather by design to further deter people from seeking asylum. So the question people ask now is, well, what can we do to help people who are seeking asylum, right? And a lot of the public, the response may be political, to reach out to those in power, and make some changes there. And while that's definitely a valuable avenue, what we were trying to consider is, how can we help the people who are there, detained or further seeking asylum and in these conditions, and try to insert as much empathy as possible to further dignify them and treat them like humans in this process, right? So the question that we really designed around was how might we equip legal advocates with tools that help migrants seeking asylum in the United States. And this question really is about how might we infuse as much empathy into the experience of preparing someone for a credible fear interview, not only on the side of someone from a Central American country seeking asylum in the United States, but also on the side of a legal advocate, be they from Northeastern or anybody else volunteering at a detention center. Because that's also an experience that has many hardships and stress, and you're vulnerable to vicarious trauma yourself. So for a few weeks, we prototyped and created an entire experience map for the journey that a legal advocate may take. And Anthony is going to walk you through the first step.
So as Colin outlined, our work has been devoted to making an extremely intellectually, physically, and mentally difficult process more easy to navigate. The advocates that we are designing for will have to plan ahead, get familiar with the new physical and legal environment, and be properly trained to effectively assist asylum seekers. Our process followed a pattern that you will see repeatedly through tonight's presentation, asking first what is being done, what can be changed, and then testing how proposed changes were received, not only by people in the legal community, but also those with psychological background and citizens who are not familiar with law or trauma and that may seek to become advocates themselves. We began our journey identifying what resources are currently available. We identified various organizations like the Asylum Seekers Advocacy Project and Immigration Justice Project that have prepared material to assist immigration law advocates. Much of this information assumes a legal background, and it can be very dense. All told, our initial PDF was over 60 pages long. Through testing, we found that the document itself was overwhelming and turned people off. The searchable aspect of the PDF, while helpful, was not enough. In the end, we needed to have a single source that advocates can come back to time and time again to assist them with credible fear interviews, which are the main focus at the Dilley Detention Center in South Texas. Of course, we thought there should be an app for that. Our testing also revealed a desire for checklists and planning tools so advocates could physically and/or mentally check off tasks before their trip to make them feel more comfortable as they prepare to enter a new environment. Then, our testing showed us that the focus on credible fear interviews allowed us to narrow our legal guidance to the repeatable tasks that will be present in every credible fear interview and have the source material behind it available to build out your knowledge of the full timeline of asylum and immigration proceedings. We then put together a few checklists like the ones you see here. Before you go, aptly stated, lets the advocates know what should be done prior to heading to South Texas. Before meeting with asylum seekers, hit on our testing feedback that people wanted repeatable tasks since they'll be unfamiliar with the process. These checklists and tools are meant to provide the most critical information in the palm of your hand. With sources in place and other guides in the universe available to gain a more complete understanding of asylum and immigration proceedings. As law students, which is half of our group, our natural inclination was to follow the lead of our professors from 1L and throw the entire body of immigration law into a PDF. But our testing in 1L revealed some pretty strong errors in that approach. We eventually found that our testers, many of whom had no legal background, felt that the law was important, but that full body of information was too easy to get lost in. Our final approach was to break asylum into each element, detail each element, and provide guides on sample questions and common acronyms that you will encounter through this process. We also made sure to include the full source information in the app so that anything that you wanted to learn more about was available to you in addition to the quick and easy checklists and guides. We know that the advocates receive a 3-hour training at Dilley when they arrive on Sunday, which breaks down the mechanics of processing these claims, how to keep track of an A file, making sure the proper documents are in place, and your official hearing conduct. So our goal with the app is to have an aggregation of resources that will inform them through the credible fear interviews and make them feel as prepared as possible in a new legal and physical environment, which Thesera will tell you more about.
So once we had tackled the pre-preparation phase of what to do before you go down there, we had to think about what you do or what you encounter once you got down there. So we had to think about the space, like the space in which that the advocates will be encountering these asylum seekers. And for that, we thought about that and we came up with a few things. One is the script and also some story tools. So focusing in on the script, my understanding is you all have a hard copy of it, but this is just a portion of it, and what we came to understand is that the Delhi Detention Center already has resources on how advocates can, interact with the asylum seekers. But what we tried to focus on was humanizing the situation, injecting more empathy, because the resources that were already out there we felt weren't sufficient in that regard. So this is just a portion of the script that is up here. And we, of course, it's not perfect because it is a prototype, but we tried to color code it. There were assumptions that we make, and then there was suggestions as how to interact with the asylum seekers. So since this is a prototype, we did test it. So what we did was we sent out the entire script to individuals, and we had this Google Doc where we got feedback from them, and we entered, the results we got, and this is what we came up with. Thank you. So some of the feedback we got was positive. For example, in terms of the seating arrangement. So what we envisioned is the advocate will never break eye contact with the asylum seeker. So for example, if I'm the advocate and the asylum seeker is sitting over here, for the interpreter or the translator would be sitting behind me. So they can translate, but I would not have to break eye contact with the asylum seeker. I wouldn't have to look, either way. We felt that things like that were important, the small things. So that we received positive feedback on. There were some suggestions, for example, mock scenarios for advocates going down there so they understand trauma. And there were also some things that we can improve upon according to feedback. For example, vague phrases in our scripts. For example, one would be, "I'm happy you're here." Greeting somebody with that, what does an asylum seeker think you mean when you say, "I'm happy you're here"? Of course, in the US, we understand that, but maybe culturally, that's not something that comes across as well as we would hope. So there are things that we can improve upon, and we would like your feedback because this is a prototype, and we will continue to improve this.
Yeah, so the second element of designing the space was really considering, also with the interaction of the asylum seeker, how you deal with bringing out their story. So when they're in their credible fear interview, a lot of the information they have to provide is what their experience was in their home country and why they can't return. And in that, they have to tell their story why they can't return. And a lot of the times, the material that these detention centers will provide when you're trying to prepare people for these credible fear interviews is a little forceful. It treats these people not quite as people, but more cogs in this process, where these details that may have been traumatic for them, they just got to bring them up on the spot. So we wanted to draw out this information in a very gentle manner that more empowered them with their narrative rather than didn't treat them with dignity. So we considered this narrative structure where the events that occurred to them were really more climactic pieces, but then the expositional elements such as where they're from and all their story in their home country before were also brought in. So we had two tools for really using this narrative idea. The first was a comic, which has been passed out to you. So the comic is great. It follows the story of Maria from Honduras to the United States. And her story is educational for the asylum seeker, making them see what elements are important for telling their story, as well as how the process might go for them. But it is also serves as a parallel for when they tell their story as a framework, and what parts to hit on. So this is a good prep before they will then tell their story, and allows them to journal some of their thoughts as well. The second tool are cards. So we didn't want to then, after presenting the comic, to have a conversation where they've got to bring out every detail from their life. If you instead present options that they can choose from and grab, then it's not necessarily as traumatic to then bring that back out. So these were prototyped over several iterations, sent to different people who responded to different elements of what they saw, whether or not they felt that the figures presented looked too cartoonish, or if they didn't exactly communicate the idea that was intended. I was lucky enough to be in touch with Margot Lindauer of the Domestic Violence Institute here at Northeastern, who went back and forth with me over all the cards, specifically on the card for sexual violence. So that was very useful. And now I believe I'm passing over to Tarka to discuss the final stage of the journey.
So my esteemed colleagues have spoken to you all about a very critical portion of this this entire project, which was the legal work that advocates going down to the border would be doing. But we realized through our research that the non-legal aspects of this type of work is just as important and as critical to effectively prepare someone for their credible fear interview. And so we created a third component to this entire package, which was a book that we've titled Journey to the Border. I believe there are copies floating around. You'll notice that the book is A4 size or regular size, but the intention of the book would be to have it designed and printed as a pocket-sized book that could fit into your pocket. And the reason why we created this book is because we understood that while legal organization through an app and the script and the cards is critical for law students and other advocates going down to the southern border, we also wanted to give them an effective tool to organize their mental, emotional, and non-legal aspects. So the book, which we thought would be intimate and perfect to fit in the pocket, provides law students and advocates with all of the things that they would need to ensure that all of the non-legal aspects of their work are taken care of. So you'll notice in the book, we included our big journey map, which set the tone for the entire book. The point of the book was to allow it to take you through your journey from when you decided to volunteer for this project to when you would return home from your week-long or however long you were at Dilley or any other detention facility helping people prepare for their credible fear assessments. As we learned through our testing with law students, they particularly liked the intimacy of the pocket-sized book. As at least law students in the room may know, we tend to carry around heavy books and lots of paper. And the idea of having everything packaged in something so small that it could fit in your pocket or like in your bag, but be non-conspicuous, was really appealing to law students. And I guess maybe we should all get little books for law stuff too. So we did test a few iterations of the book. The one that you're seeing now is, I can't remember what version it is, but my wonderful design team put together several versions of the book. We tested different colors, tested different fonts, tested different games, tested different journey maps. So what you're seeing now is a product of 2 weeks of constant adaptation. And I'd just like to highlight a few points from the book. So as you can see, the book has the first few pages allow you to prepare for things that my colleagues spoke about, as in before you go, knowing the place, having space for you to write down contact information. But we realized that we also wanted to give prompts for advocates to remind themselves about key points in their behavior when they were down there. So the first one is cultural competency. And not all of these questions made it into the book, but these were some of the things we were thinking about when thinking about how best advocates should communicate with their clients. This is certainly, again, not an exhaustive list, but these questions serve to remind advocates as they're waiting outside a detention room to meet their clients to remind themselves to think about these things as they're conducting the interview and as they're going through the script that Thesauri just presented. Our testing with law students also revealed that they liked the glossary. And again, a non-exhaustive list. There are only so many words we can fit into a pocket-sized book. But we tested with law students and found that even a few words would be helpful. Again, just to prompt students to remember important key terms, how to reference themselves as a lawyer in Spanish. And again, this is to note that Spanish would be one of the languages they would likely encounter, perhaps the predominant language, but again, not the only language. We are not quite sure how to fit other languages into a pocket-sized book, but that's certainly something that we should and can explore later. Next, we realized that the idea of self-care, which is something that everyone perhaps practices very differently, was a difficult one for us to include in this project. It's hard to tell someone going down to Texas where they may never have been, to tell them, oh, well, make sure you go to the gym or make sure you go eat healthy salads from Sweet Green, because we honestly don't know what's down there. But we knew that we could inject some inspiration and levity in our little book. So we included a few quotes that we hope people would find useful, inspirational. You'll see in your versions of the book that they have lines above and below and after, just so people could either use it as inspiration to write something down that they were feeling, write down reminders about, practicing self-care. We also included games because for the very same reason. There is no one way to practice self-care, and we thought that adding games like coloring, tic-tac-toe, we have connect the dots in there, and we can add more games. But we thought adding those would provide students the opportunity to either take a moment to be quiet and for themselves, and either color by themselves or connect the dots or play Sudoku if we put that in there. But also to maybe interact with someone else, whether it was another advocate that was traveling with them, someone they met at the detention facility, someone they met at Dilley. So they could interact and engage while in an intense environment, but over an activity that is a little more low-key. And finally, this is one of my favorite pages. We provided a page for students to draw their own journey map. And I don't know, law students in the room may not know what a journey map is. I didn't know what a journey map was 6 weeks ago. And the law students we tested with didn't really know what a journey map was. But the idea was to give advocates this opportunity to be creative, to draw whatever it is that they saw their journey as being, what it could be, what it was. And you'll see we just gave them a few little markers as start and finish, if they choose to use those as start and finish. But the idea was for them to take the journey map that we've created as inspiration, but then to draw their own journey map. Because after all, their journey to the border would be so specific to each advocate. And essentially, we were hoping that this book, combined with all of the other tools presented today, would allow advocates to effectively prepare asylum seekers for their credible fear interviews and practice self-care, and ultimately have a place where they can tell their story. So thank you very much for listening to our presentation, and we're happy to take any questions.